Oh, thank you.
Okay, everybody, so welcome back from your break. So today, I think we're very fortunate, you're very fortunate to be able to hear Rabi. Uzi is a professor at Tel Aviv University, and he's, well, first of all, he's a senior ISGAP research fellow. It's the most important part of his resume. No, I'm kidding. He's also the director of the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. It's the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies. It's a preeminent center in Israel on these issues. His research focuses on modern history and the evolution of states and societies in the Middle East. He's an expert on Iranian-Arab or Sunni Shiite relations and the politics of oil in the Middle East. And he's really a leading commentator in Israel and the media. So we're fortunate that he's here with us. And today, his lecture now, he'll be speaking on 2 occasions. Now he's speaking about the new regionalism in the Middle East and issues of anti-Semitism. So Izzy, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Charles. It's great as always to be here, and I'm very pleased to be here and just to, thank you, share with you some of our insights about, you know, our ever-changing Middle East. And I have 2 presentations, the first of which I would put it roughly, would deal with the not so good things in the Middle East, and there are many, but the second would bring in sort of a glimpse of optimism. I'm going actually on the second chapter to deal with the United Arab Emirates, to talk about the Abraham Accords. We do witness kind of a real I would say sort of a breakthrough when it comes to academic cooperation and alike when it comes to states like United Arab Emirates. So we'll have actually to talk about this and that. And today's presentation deals with what we call new regionalism. The basic assumption is that you cannot analyze the geopolitical set of the Middle East as was the case in the 20th century. Something dramatic happened in the opening decades of the 21st century. I'll try to be very short on that, because what we are trying to do is just to get an idea of how the newly created situation, geopolitically, geoecologically, geoeconomically, is being grasped by certain players, and what is the modus operandi each one of them is coming up with. It has to do with Israel. It has to do with who the enemy is. It has to do with the future of the Middle East. So I'll try actually to be very, very short on that, but let's just make sure that when it comes to globally speaking, we should just take into account what happened here with the United States of America. Maybe it's not final, but once again, I'm not talking about American policy in the US. What I'm trying actually to deliver is how players in the Middle East do take American performance and what they do have in their back of mind while thinking of America or the US as a backup, as was the case in the 20th century. So we know it's Obama, Biden, Trump, but one thing we can be assured of: United States of America actually has prioritized its geopolitical interest in the globe. The Middle East is not ranking high, so to speak. And basically what we had seen recently is kind of an evacuation or a pull out of American forces of 2 seemingly Vietnams they had witnessed in the Middle East, which is Iraq and Afghanistan. It came to nothing. There is a fatigue, and the United States has some other priorities. America first, would definitely be something that should be considered as kind of a direction or a step to the right direction, at least in America's mind. What you see down there is Saudi oil fields that were attacked by Yemenite militias, sort of a proxy of Iran in Yemen. They attacked the Saudi oil fields in 2019 and brought to kind of a halt of 50-60% of Saudi capacity of production and transportation of oil for almost half a year. If that what happened 30 years ago, this is sort of a world war. The simple fact that this event was to go unnoticed by itself left many players with sort of a trauma in the Middle East. A state like Saudi Arabia hasn't got the knowledge how to conduct itself without an American backup. This is what the Saudis know. They can get back to 1991. They put it to the test. This was a new litmus test, after which many players in the Middle East take into the account that things have changed dramatically here, and they would like actually to see that. Of course, we don't have time for that, but Belt and Road strategy, there is no vacuum being left behind. China is here for all means and purposes. We don't have time for that. But basically, you can see that either via the continent or via the sea, we are having kind of two arms getting into the Middle East. Basically, it is economic might, but one should ask himself whether or when the Chinese are going actually to translate this economic might into geopolitical or military considerations. If we take the Ukraine war as kind of an additional development that was to bring into the globe kind of another East, which is sort of a very troublesome. This is East Europe, of course, but take into account Russia is in the Middle East, eastern coast of the Mediterranean. Ukraine actually used to be sort of a supplier of wheat and basic commodities to many poor Middle Eastern countries. So this war is not kind of a thing to be analyzed by itself. There are many ramifications when it comes to food industry, when it comes to the nature of war or culture of war, and when it comes to Russian interest in the Middle East. What I'm trying to say is that every state in the Middle East, every state has to recalculate or to refoster its strategy, because many things that were very relevant for geopolitical consideration in the 20th century, all these elements have become null and void. You have to come up with out-of-the-box thinking. You have to fairly internalize the newly created situation and build up sort of an equation that would fit your march for future survival or whatever it is. So you have to have that in mind, because this is the outer circle. Every state in the Middle East, it could be Egypt, it could be Syria, it could be Iran, it could be Saudi Arabia, each one of them having kind of a different calculus in line with those dramatic changes. When it comes to the region, here we have sort of an octopus. I know that you're going to have kind of a presentation on that. Yep, Iran and... but just look at that. This is the Iranian octopus. Things that we had said for almost 25, 30 years came to fruition, so to speak. This is it. Here is Iran. Look at all these arrows. Each one of them is striving for creating kind of a foothold, either in an Arab failed states like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, or it could come to Gaza with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and down to Yemen. Basically, states like Saudi Arabia, just to give you an example of that, feels as if it is being sieged by Iran. And if you add to that actually the American new performance, Saudis are in real anxiety, trauma. You just have it your way, but this is definitely kind of a very, very dramatic issue. In the process, Arab states actually went into oblivion. Our dealing with the Middle East, actually, at least when it comes to me, in our laboratories, we don't think that Iraq is a state. Any Iraqis here? Sorry. No. You know, my parents were born in Iraq, so I can talk about, I am of an Iraqi origin, so to speak. But you know, when it comes to the state itself, it is broken. It is broken, it is a failed state. We don't have time to deal with that. But this is kind of a state that was created 20 years ago, exactly 100 years ago, sorry, by the British. It was supposed to become the newly created democratic state in the Middle East, sort of a model. And it happened to become sort of a failed state, as we said before, Shiite, Sunnis, Arab, Kurds, in the middle some other minorities, but there is a huge fiasco there. And what Iraq is and who is, I mean, what Iraqiness is something that is being left open. And for us, when it comes to this picture, Iraq has become actually kind of a mainstay of Iran, from which to go eastwards to the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. Here comes another state that has become kind of an easy prey for Iran. This is Syria's Bashar al-Assad. If you go up, I mean, of course, we don't have time for that. Up there, you get Turkey's Erdogan actually swallowing up some parts of Syria. Russia is here in the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. ISIS used to be here. After the demise of ISIS, actually, Iran is here. So this is Iraq, this is Syria, and this would be Lebanon. There is kind of a continuum being stretched from the Persian Gulf, as the Iranians would depict it, to the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. And this is something that is kind of a huge concern, not only for Israel, but for some other, let's say, I won't say moderate, but pro-Western Arab states, mainly monarchies, and some other states like Egypt, who would really like actually to see that being dealt with in kind of a different way. The wild south of Syria, I know that you're going to talk about that, I guess, but this is the Golan, Syrian Golan Height here. This has become kind of a land where kind of a drug industry is being cultivated. If you try to think actually where comes the money of Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad, you have here kind of a huge industry which is being nurtured and becoming something of, once again, huge concern for neighboring states like Jordan and others. The Lebanese saga, well, we are well known with the south of Lebanon, but try to have this whole thing. Maybe we're going to see that in, look at that. This is it, okay? So we don't have time to delve into it, but if that was my presentation, I could have shown you sort of a corridor which is being stretched from Iran to the eastern flank of the Mediterranean, and this is exterritorialized by Iran in the sense of economy, militias, politics, etc. It's not just armed men actually acting for Iran. Iran is there by all means and purposes, in the parliament, in the industry of so many highly needed or sought after economic fields, and of course when it comes to military operation. The other side of that would be Yemen, and this is where we are. This is the situation. It is impossible to get Iran being pulled out from these states. Why? This is an informal conquest. You don't know actually where Iran is, because Iran is not sending troops or forces. Iran is basically becoming the patron of many Shiite groups in those failed states, and more often than not, actually, it brings in some Shiites from non-Arab states like Afghanistan and Pakistan to be resided in Syria and to start changing the socio-demographic composition of the state. So if I'm a Sunni Syrian that actually found shelter in Europe or any other part of the world because Bashar al-Assad was haunting me, there is no way back. The gates are open for people like us, Alawites, Shiites, etc. And who is the great orchestrator of this whole thing? This is the Islamic Republic of Iran. So in the region, we have that kind of a situation where there are, where there are many states, groups, which adhere to an Iranian strategy or become sort of proxies of Iran all over the place. And if we come to think of the past of the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, this is becoming kind of a very, very forcefully put or sophisticated organ which capitalize on the failing of Arab states and turning all these states into something different. So try to think of indoctrination, try to think of the revival of Shi'i sites in both Syria and in some cases Lebanon. It is something that with the passage of time, we do have kind of a different situation, socio-demographically, socio-politically speaking, and this is of course has to do with the changing circumstances here. So for Israel, when Israel stands here in the eastern flank of the Mediterranean, Iran is everywhere. Everywhere. And this has become kind of a state which is very, very close to nuclear capacity. Nobody can prevent that at this stage anymore. And of course, luckily for Israel, there are some Arab states who are familiar with the Iranian advantage. They are familiar with the, they actually bear some, let us say, deep animosities coming from times immemorial when it comes to Arabs versus Persians, Sunnah and Shia. And since they do say loud and clear, but not loud and clear, behind the scenes now, that Iran is not to be trusted, they are becoming sort of collaborators with others who would like actually to ease the tension that is being posed by the Iranian strategy. Let's move to the inner circle. We are talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Well, what happened actually more than 2 years ago, there was sort of another rift between Gaza and Israel, Gaza, Hamas. But this time, the whole operation, which was named or titled the Guardian of the Wall, has resulted in something which was unprecedented. Until then, every flare-up between Israel and Hamas in Gaza was to become a bilateral conflict. It was so strange to see that nobody actually, even when it comes to the Palestinians in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, nobody actually thought to intervene or to side with Hamas practically. What happened in the Guardian of the Wall, in no time, all these fronts were to be flared up, not only in Gaza, it was West Bank, East Jerusalem, Lebanon, and Israel proper. What does that mean, Israel proper? What we did see in mixed cities like Jaffa, Haifa, Acre, we had seen sort of an Arab-Jewish riots between Jews and Arabs, protests, and things that actually made, let us say, players like Hamas think that the files of 48 are still alive and kicking, not only 67. From then on, actually, what these guys are trying to do is what we call the multi-front platform. What Hamas is trying to do is just to capitalize on the dwindling power of the PA in Ramallah, getting closer to the center of gravity, which is Temple Mount. And you know, there you have the sanctity of Jerusalem versus Al-Aqsa as the third haram, which is the sacred site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. Okay? So it is very combustible. And if you have sort of a troublemaker in the neighborhood, this could become in no time sort of a bloody war, because it brings in the religious motives of the conflict to become actually the motives which dictate the rhythm. Look at that. This is West Bank up there on Gaza. This is the polarization Israel actually has been working on for years. Now I think actually there is sort of a backlash, because in Ramallah, in the West Bank, we have a very, very pale leadership when it comes to the Fatah and Abu Mazen and the PA. And what Hamas is trying to do, as I said before, is to capitalize on that and get in and become the ultimate undeniable leader of Palestine. Just remember that Hamas is very strong here when it comes to the enclave of Jenin and the north of Samaria. But when it comes to Jerusalem, as we said before, this is kind of the big apple. If Hamas is getting closer to Al-Aqsa, he would try actually to do two things. First of all, to ignite or to fan the flame via Al-Aqsa and stuff like that. Second, to minimize the scope of presence of King Jordan's, Abdullah's forces or leather staff in the Temple Mount or in Al-Aqsa, and create kind of a replace or becoming a substitute of the Jordanian one-time control over this site. So try to think of that. Hamas and Fatah, of course, these are two different idioms and two different directions of what Palestinian nationalism is. Hamas is adhering to Palestinian nationalism, but he is using Islamic motives or religious motives in order to further strengthen this trend. What we got here when it comes to Hamas and Fatah is a sort of a situation where, as I said, the religious guys do succeed in further religionize the conflict. And as I said before, this is very, very dangerous. Here you have another group side by side with Hamas. They do not work together, but basically they are coming from the same plate or the same basin, ideologically speaking. I'm talking about Islamic Jihad. This is sort of an undermined group, but both of them could be found in Gaza. Hamas is trying actually to just get, I would say, kind of an advantage of many, many things that happen in the Middle East. As I said before, Iran, Hezbollah, United States is not that present anymore. At least this is what they have in mind. Israel is in situation which brings it close to an abyss. You know that? And for some reason, and that could be understandable, players like Hamas, like Hezbollah, can imagine or they do believe that it is high time for them to taste the water against Israel, or to put to the test Israel's abilities to react in kind of a situation, this and that. This is what we call, actually, to further religionize the conflict. Al-Aqsa is under threat. This is something that we do here back and forth. Al-Aqsa fi khatar. What does that mean? This is a hashtag of many I would say websites that were ran in the recent years, when you would like actually to make people be motivated to get out and do something by themselves as loners. You are going actually to just make them do that via the social networks. Hamas is becoming kind of a giant in this, of course, relatively speaking, when it comes to the social networks. But there are many people who are being inspired by slogans like that. Al-Aqsa is under threat, or Al-Aqsa in Khatar. Basically, these are slogans that were heard in this region in the 30s, but by no other than Khaj Amin al-Husseini, who actually you are familiar with from his deeds before the war and in the course of the Second World War. We do here, and this is something that should be scary for everybody, that the conflict between Israel and Palestinians is not necessarily a national conflict, but a rather religious one. So remember that if we are going actually to speak or to talk or to define this conflict in religious terms, what we are doing is actually to expand the scope of the conflict and to put it between Marrakesh and Bangladesh, if I may say so. One thing is mano a mano, national conflict, Israelis, Palestinians. Another thing is to say that the whole thing here is about Al-Aqsa or Temple Mount when it comes to Jews. So same people actually should strive for pulling out the religious motives of this conflict and stay close to what we can say territorial conflict, national conflict. This is something that we do see here. It's becoming Islam versus Judaism. And of course, I'm not saying that only one side is doing that. You don't have to do too many troublemakers actually to fan the flame when it comes to the religion. If you have on both sides troublemakers of that kind, you are doomed. Because actually, as I said before, you are broadening up the scope of the conflict to kind of a stage which is uncontrollable. Why it is so important when it comes to what we are saying here now today, and this anti-Semitic music that we had seen before, but the convergence of what I said till now create kind of a one step further when it comes to that. The bottom line would be that, and this is something that we had seen in the States, in Europe, and in many other places in the recent years, but the blurring the lines between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, this is becoming actually kind of a cry of the hour. This is something when it comes to Hamas Hezbollah, it comes full circle with what they were to bring from the first step, the 30s, the 40s, when Israel was created, decades after that. Now it comes full circle. We do see actually the protocols of the elders of Zion. This is, of course, something which is very, very regular in the bazaars of Iran and in some Arab radical circles, because this is the whole Torah, so to speak. From there you could glean many, many truths regarding Jews as they are. Zionists control the media and the world government. Once again, it's not new, but now it is becoming actually full-time when it comes to Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad and others. Zionists are greedy. Zionists or Israel perpetrated the 9/11 atrocities. Zionists are disloyal to the United States. Even with the United States, their disloyalty actually became something which is pretty evident. Of course, they are just capitalizing on the nowadays deteriorating situations between Israel and the United States when it comes to the Biden establishment and the government of Israel. I think that the bottom line here is becoming very, very penetrating. All Jews are Zionists. So there is no need whatsoever to start differentiate. I'll make kind of a shortcut. The story is much simpler than many, many academicians are trying to bring in. There is no difference whatsoever between Jews and Zionists. And with that kind of thing, I mean, we see that, I mean, when was the corona? Look at that. This is, I'm just bringing you some stuff. Sorry?
I was joking, Joel showed us a very similar one. I said, where have I seen that before?
Yeah. This is الفيروس الأخطر على البشرية. So where comes, I mean, this COVID-19 comes from? Look at that. You're going to have kind of an idea. This is the most dangerous virus human beings actually have ever known. This is what is written there. This used to be actually the health minister of the PA. This is exactly what she said during the corona. IDF soldiers are firing corona bullets. This is exactly what he said on Palestinians. And this is why actually in the West Bank and Gaza you got this virus. Of course, there is something that you have to be familiar with, because everybody is trying actually to just elaborate on what's going on nowadays in Israel. And what's going on nowadays in Israel is a real drama. And I know that my friend, my colleague of Tel Aviv University, Professor Yossi Shine, is here, and he's going to further elaborate on that. The Jewish conflict is becoming much more attractive than the Palestinian or the Arab Jewish one or the Muslim Jewish one. I leave it for him and you to deal with that. That's not easy. But my job is to give you an idea of how things are being actually portrayed in the mind of the other side. Hassan Nasrallah, already in 2000, when he was so thrilled to see that the Israelis are pulling out of Lebanon, he came up with a speech that in Arabic was named Bayt al-Ankabut, which means actually the house of the spider. I mean, cobweb theory. What was that? It was to say that Israel might be very strong militarily, very strong technologically, but very weak when it comes to its internal cohesion. Basically what he said, that this is kind of a bunch of migrants coming from here and there, creating kind of an artificial state? I wouldn't say that. If what would have happened in Israel today wouldn't actually make those people coming with kind of a saying, haven't we told you that? Why you are so surprised? And of course, I don't want to get into that, but it is very dangerous because people in the Middle East, more often than not, interpret the reality in terms of their very, very selective historical memory. And basically, we have here something which is very, very problematic. Look at that. This is something we had seen. Well, this is the cobweb theory of the Israeli society. And you know, if you look at history, you come up with stuff that says that other than Muslims, nobody actually has managed to rule this land of Palestine more than 75 to 80 years. How old Israel is? 75. So for them, the best is yet to come. Now, don't underestimate or belittle what I'm saying here. I'm not talking about facts and figures. But there is something which is much more solid in the Middle East than facts and figures. Is what people have between their own ears. What they have in their back of mind. This whole drama or theater that I am portraying here seems to be interpreted as kind of a golden opportunity for some of them, and this is why we are in a very combustible and very, very sensitive reality. Zionists are ideologically akin to Nazis. What is that? This is something that, I mean, it is taken from Al-Hayat Al-Jadida. I'm talking about, you know, Arab press. I'm not showing something that actually Israel is publishing. But this is taken from the Tel Aviv protests. What is written here is the tsunami al-fashiyin. Fashiyin, it's fascists, Nazis. There is a fascist tsunami in Israel. Israel تسارع نفسها. What did I say in Arabic? Israel is fighting itself. This goes back or echoing something that George Habash, one of the Palestinian leaders of the 50s and the 60s, while being asked actually, what are we going to do with Israel? 48, done. 67, done. Nakba, Naksa. And he said actually, we have to fight, go on, but be sure, he said, that in the end of the day, we're going to see or witness what he said in Arabic, هبوط القلعة من الداخل, which means that this whole citadel is going to be collapsed from within. So you get kind of a dilemma. You have Nasser Hassan Nasrallah and others. Should we actually do something with Israel nowadays or capitalize on that, or maybe stay and practice the art of fence sitting and let them actually kill themselves by themselves? Crazy. This guy actually has come up with kind of a very, very nice, not nice, sorry, well argumented article which speaks about Israel from 1977 until today. So he's analyzing actually the Israeli dynamics, politics and society, bringing some landmarks, and jump to the conclusion that Israel actually has been taken captive by right-wingers, and this is kind of an ongoing process that has been seen there for 50 years. I mean, the simple fact that, Arabs, Palestinians have found it very, very interesting to start analyzing Israel, academically speaking, dealing with all these, you say, differences in Israel, in Israeli society, this whole fiasco, or I don't know, imbroglios between state and society, politics and economy, This is something that definitely make the imagination of such people, groups, and others be very, very active, and it should be taken into account. Now, how much time do I have?
20 more, 15 to 20 minutes, then Q&A.
And then Q&A. But on the other hand, and here comes the good news, something very important happened in the Middle East in the recent decades. In order to make sure that I'm not, I have to be very, very short on that, I would say that every state is running a very particularistic agenda. Every state is keenly aware of the pros and cons of the 21st century, and no state would sacrifice its particular interest for the sake of Arab collectiveness or Islamic collectiveness, as was the case in the 20th century. This is the flip side. Why do I say that? Because I've seen that actually in the recent years more and more when it comes to Arab states that were crossing the Rubicon and starting dealing with stuff and reality as it is, not as it should be. Here we have something that is very important. Look at the Biden administration and the strive for understandings with Iran. What does that mean, understandings? It means that we are not going to have an agreement. It means that we are not going actually to have a replica of the JCPOA. Understandings. So if you ask me actually what do understandings, what are they for? Just to get some sort of a lull, a period where the Middle East is not just coming up with another flare-up. And this is something that we do see that. It would be very fit for Iran to have that because Iran is going to be rewarded. It would be very, very fit for the Biden administration to have it because we are, the forthcoming year is a year of election. And election is the most important thing actually people could think of when it comes to politicians, of course. Look at that. Saudi-Syrian rapprochement. Well, this guy, 10 years ago, was a pariah. Saudis, Emiratis, and others were pouring a lot of money in Syria in order to strengthen the rebels against Bashar. Bashar is still there thanks to Russia and, of course, Iran. And Arab states, while looking at what's going on, would say 1 out of 2. If you can't beat them, join them. But if not, let's have kind of a dialogue with Bashar. Maybe we can persuade him to lessen his dependence on Iran. Syria is not a state. As we said before, it's kind of an open space being wrapped up by 4 non-Arab players: Israel, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Iranian-Saudi agreement. If the United States is not in, if Iran goes nuclear, how would I minimize the scope of danger? I might go with the Chinese, which are becoming a new interlocutor, and they are in between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the Chinese are basically importers of oil, so this would be very, very fit for their interest. Are they going actually to provide the Saudis or the Iranians? Maybe the Saudis guarantee, who knows? US and Saudi Arabia, where to? What the Americans are concocting, in my opinion, of course, It's kind of a deal with which actually to make sure that the Middle East, at least for a year or two, is very quiet, relatively speaking. We know why it is so important for the Americans. So here is the thing, actually. Foreign Secretary is here in Saudi Arabia a day after Iran has agreed to have an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Why is he here? In order to maybe appease the Saudis, make sure that they are not going all the way or tilting toward the Chinese at the expense of the Americans. And he is trying to find out what the Saudis would like to have. Well, the Saudis would like to have two things. A green light for nuclear capacity for civilian purposes. Because the Saudis, as we said before, they could have lived with a Middle East where there is a rumor about a state that has had nuclear capacity. They wouldn't actually live 1 minute in a Middle East where Iran is going nuclear. And if Iran is going nuclear, they are not going to lag behind. So you need the Americans actually to formalize their nuclear capacity. They need the Americans actually to bring back, they can't bring back Nixon and Kissinger, but they would like to have something actually of the same, or more of the same. Kind of an American establishment that would guarantee the Saudis that if and when worst comes to worst, America gonna be there, as was the case in 1991. I don't know if the Americans actually are able to do that. Of course, the Biden administration is not able to do that because of internal political problem. Congress, Democratic Party, the staff of Mohammed bin Salman, and the human rights in Saudi Arabia. You know all of that. But here comes actually kind of a very interesting calculation or calculus. If we're going to support the Saudis with military technology, if we can actually in halfway actually guarantee sort of protection for the Saudis if the worst actually scenario happens, this would actually make the Saudi be satisfied. And in order to just complete the whole process, we're going to also offer normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It's sort of a win-win, but it is trying actually to make the Middle East be closed or handicapped by many, many agreements that could be seen there. Normalization is great for definitely for Israel and Saudi Arabia, but basically if we understand that the Americans are the main architect here, and just to remind you, 4 months ago, Biden said loud and clear that there is no chance under the circumstances to have normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So how come that actually everybody is talking about that nowadays? Of course, you have actually to look for American interest. You have to look for Saudi interest. Israel would be thrilled. Israel would have to pay something in Palestinian coin because Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Arab fold, and it could not actually have that kind of an agreement even halfway without getting something which is of meaning when it comes to the Palestinians. So now we have the whole thing together. We don't have kind of one arm very, very well concerned and focused on an effort by which to pacify stuff in the Middle East. What we got is bits and pieces. The forest is very, very combustible. We have so many hands, so many orientations. Once we understand who is who, once we understand what each state has in mind, we are bettering our situation. Let me give you an example. And Charles, please stop me when you think I should stop. This is Egypt. Just small case study. 110 million people. This is the Nile, the lifeline of Egypt. Now look at Egypt. Troubles coming from here. What is that? Libya. This is Libya. Used to be, comparatively speaking, a very, very stable state under a guy named Muammar al-Qaddafi. What happened in Libya is the opening up of gates of hell after Gaddafi's demise. It's Benghazi or Cyrenaica versus Tripolitania, tribes, smugglers, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and what Sisi actually is having in mind is how to block this border and prevent from these actually ugly phenomenons to be inserted into Egypt. Who is the enemy? ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt is being helped out by a dear friend in order to cope with that better. I'll leave it for your imagination to think who the dear friend is. Haftar, this is kind of a military leader who is running the eastern flank of Libya, or one-time Libya. This is Cyrenaica, this is Tripolitania. What happened in Libya? Primordial identities are dictating the rhythm. What is Tripolitania? What is Cyrenaica? What is Fezzan? 3 different provinces before Libya actually were to come together. The fascinating thing is that when states are being broken, in no time, they are getting back to their primordial constructions. 1, 2, 3. I have shown you that when it comes to Iraq. I know that Charles actually might have heard me saying that actually in a different occasion, but I have to say that because this is kind of a very, very telling example. This is Iraq. When it was announced in February 1921 that a state named Iraq is going to be announced in a month from now on, March 1921, there was a telegram that I was very, very lucky to find in the Public Record Office while actually gathering stuff for my PhD study. It was a telegram sent for the Foreign Office, London, to Sir Arnold Wilson, the High Commissioner of the British in Iraq. I named this telegram as "What If." It was a clerk asking a question about what if Sunnis would go for Shiites or vice versa. What if Arabs and Kurds, as always, would go for the other? So who can guarantee us that once we declare about an independent Iraq, all these rifts are going to be left behind? I spent 5 days in the attempt to find out the answer coming from Baghdad back to London. It was so telling. Sir Arnold Wilson actually has responded saying that it started that way. Many thanks for your letter. How very observant of you. So he said that this Claire actually knew something. But in the end of the day, actually, Wilson said that what you are afraid of, what you are implied to, won't happen here. Why? and here comes the punchline, we shall teach them to let bygone be bygone. You can't do that. Definitely not in this region where human beings actually have started their very, very early first civilizations. Assyrians, Akkadis, Sumerians. So I just give you something that would make you understand that the Middle East has its own problems, not to the future. People are not that fit with their own past. And this is why actually the present looks like that. I have to say something that is very, very important, but I would use it as kind of a prelude to my next presentation. The good thing is that sane and realistic states have understood that their fiercest enemy wouldn't be another state. It would be Mother Nature. I have seen that in Morocco, I have seen that in the Emirates, I know that about Saudi Arabia. It is very relevant to Iran. It is very relevant to the Fertile Crescent. Some of the states actually have jumped to the conclusion that if they are not going to come up with kind of a brave step forward by which to name the enemy and not to be taken captive by idioms coming from the basin of the 20th century, they are going actually to just dictate a new rhythm. And let me tell you that the sky is the limit. The big gap, huge gap between what's going on between Israel and other Arab states beneath the table and what we do here up there when it comes to the public discourse, two different operas. Two different operas. Now, I came to understand that there are states who cannot give up on that anymore because it has to do with their own future survival. And this is why I think that this is the glimpse of hope we have here. What the United Arab Emirates did do, and I know that you are familiar with that, Charles, too, is it's not only actually to collaborate with Israel. For the first time, is to talk about Israel's pain in kind of a way by which to understand the otherness of the other. Holocaust being taught, being instituted to the curricula, to the textbooks. Nobody has become a Zion lover. No worry about that. But if I would like you as a partner, I have to be familiar with the ingredients of your otherness. And if I wouldn't got a clue about what is your, defect, because everybody has the defect, no problem, I wouldn't find kind of a way by which to further collaborate with you, cooperate with you. So this is actually lasting note. And you would like me to just open up the...
Sure, yeah.
So,
Cool. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we have like 30 minutes for Q&A. I'll try to, incorporate as many people as I can. So if you wave to me, I'll create a list. So Sami,
I like to bring something to the octopus table. Because you're talking about the octopus. I'm from Venezuela. I seen the octopus.
The octopus is there too.
Is there.
Yeah, I know.
The octopus is there.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's there. It's in Nicaragua. It's in Bolivia.
Exactly.
So many of the things that you have mentioned here, I've seen them over there. I've actually written quite a bit on that subject also. And again, they are going in not only through the political and economic thing, which they are going in through religion also. You see, Latin American are a religious group. I mean, and they are very susceptible, just like they have been very susceptible to evangelicals, which 100 years ago didn't exist in Latin America. Now they are over 100 million. They're doing the same thing with Shia now. Now we see mosques and things going on over there. So you study this. Maybe you should take this into consideration for your next octopus, the octopus 2.0.
We have taken that into consideration a long time ago, and we know that what Iran is running via Hezbollah and other proxies in Latin America is a huge industry of drugs, a lot of money actually, which is being used for sponsoring terrorism all over the place. And I agree with you, these states are having actually the same or a similar process we have some with Arab states in the Middle East. They are a dwindling state. They are losing their vitality. And once actually you are losing your vitality, this is high time for Iran to capitalize on them. This is exactly what they did here there. Venezuela is just one very good example, but we are familiar with that. I fully agree with you, definitely. This is a Iranian modus operandi, and it has to be taken into account.
Thank you.
You should remember Alberto Nisman. Was a friend of
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah,
Nisman.
Nisman. Yeah, we just celebrated 29 years of the Amia bombing by Hezbollah.
Sure.
Okay, and we did a project about Nisman with Pedro Gonzalez, who was here a couple of years ago. So sure, I mean, they are there.
Exactly.
No, excuse me. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be next.
You mentioned Israel, this octopus in all the region, and I think that you didn't mention the presence of Israel in southern Algeria, of Iran in southern Algeria, supporting this separatist group against Morocco.
You mean Polisario? You mean
Polisario, you have
Southern Sahara?
Southern Sahara, yeah, Western Sahara. You have Centro Locano in Spain who wrote about it. You have even your Secret Service writing about it, the State Department, Moroccan Service Secret, and the links are clear. This is why Morocco refused to establish diplomatic relations with Iran lately. It was invitation from Iran after having this, let's say, open door to discuss with Saudi Arabia. My point here is another point is that don't you think that these Arab states are moving because you know that ideology is the driving power in that region. Morocco is quite different. So I think you understand specifically of Moroccan culture, ethnicity, and so on. So do you think that these Arab states reach maturity? And now you started thinking not from the ideological, emotional standpoint. Instead, now they are thinking more of the continuity of the state and the interests. And the other thing.
So this is the third thing now.
Yeah,
If I
the first one wasn't
if I
a
count now, yeah,
First
okay,
one wasn't a question.
yeah.
So
No, but the first one is very important. So I mean, you said that, I didn't mention that, but كل واحد لحاله, everybody for itself. For Morocco, Southern Sahara is very important for this king and to his father.
not just
Israel
for
is-
us, all
yeah.
the people.
Yeah,
Because we were an empire, right? Like Morocco borders was from Tangier, my city, the north, extreme north of the country, until Saint-Louis, the river of Saint-Louis in Senegal. Because of colonization.
yeah, that's
and because of the
that's
history of
true.
the country. So
No,
no, here
That's
we
true.
just to show the long.
but
arc
but
of
I want
Iran.
you, and I hope that I'm not putting that too cynically. I want you to understand the rules of the game. I'm sitting in my laboratory. I'm looking at Morocco. I know that Morocco actually is very, very needy on some stuff, technologically, ecologically. I know that Morocco has kind of a wonderful history when it comes to Jewish Moroccans or Moroccan Jews, okay? I know that Morocco is in the Abraham Accords already. So what should I do? I should support Algeria and Polisario? No. if I would like, sorry for putting that, I don't want to, it maybe, but this is a cynicism with which things are being played out. This is why I said that you don't have those camps anymore. You don't have Marxism, you don't have Ba'ath parties, you don't have all these dreams, you don't have this new Middle East, Arab states, you like Nasser said, min al-Muhit ila al-Khalij. You have only the world of Walt Disney. Other than that, you have bits and pieces. Now, if you would like to deal with that, and to better your country, sorry for putting that once again cynically, you should just try to tie up your abilities to his needs and vice versa, in order to create kind of an equation where you could find sort of a win-win situation when it comes to kind of a mutual dependence, when states does understand, and you know, you can sit in the Sahara. What you're going to do with the desertification? You know, what is the desertification? Sahara is eating the fertile land. Who is going actually to stop that? If we together are going to find out sort of a gadget by which to do that, this is politics of survival. I can't put it in a different way. And this is why, you know, things like that.
This ecological challenge actually involved Israel as well, is suffering from the same problem.
Yeah.
So fighting the same enemy, let's say, makes sense. But what about the states reaching maturity? For example, if I take the case of Saudi
It's a good
Arabia,
question, yeah.
you have the vacuum created by the lack of the American administration right now. I guess like many may agree or disagree with Trump, but he was one of the best presidents for Israel, recognizing Jerusalem as capital of Israel, Abraham Accord that opened the door wide actually to, and even Saudi Arabia, I know because I have friends in the Knesset, I have politicians in
And they would admire Trump. I mean, those friends from the Knesset.
I mean, like, you know, you give him good stuff and you give him bad stuff as well. But let's say foreign policy, there was some kind of stability for a while, and that opened the door for what we know now as Abraham Accords, and Israel now is having new partners, and Saudi Arabia is next in line. We know this. I'm not naming names, but I know that in maybe six to 8 months we would have good news. But for the what's it called, these countries are reaching maturity and they are trying now to play continuity game based on interest and not on emotional Islamic.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, I do think this is a maturity. And you know, when I was asked that whether they are going to become 100% democracies or they are going to stick to the tyranny, you know, position, or stay on be dictatorial regimes, you know, more often than not, I think of democtatura. You know, something in the middle that would be very, very fit to their own interest, as you said. Just here and there you have kind of ingredients of maturity. You're going to open up the political system, but not too much. You're going to think of how actually to compensate your people. I think, you know, I'm just completing my book on the United Arab Emirates. And yes, I think that this is a new political culture that shouldn't be belittled. I mean, you know, I know that people say, hey, they have money, they can do whatever they can. No, there is kind of a very, very sophisticated wisdom behind it. They are not angels. Not at all. They are not actually Democrats, not at all. But as many Emiratis would tell you, actually, you know, when I was there with the first American delegation after the Abraham Accords, one of the group actually just was very urging, asking me, so, but how come they gonna leave without democracy? And he asked a very, very well-educated lady that used to be kind of a member in one of the board of a very, very well-known firm. And when he asked her, so, but how can you live without democracy? And she thought actually for 10, 15 seconds. And they said, you know what, I haven't thought about that till now. Let me think of that and get back to you. But she says something that, you know, my children are going to get the best education they have. I feel very, very secured day and night in my home country. You know, I'm not saying we are Democrats. I am a Democrat. I mean, I know that this is the, how do you say that? I mean, it's not the best, but the least worst, actually, you know, a regime somebody could have. But I think that, you know, when it comes to different cultures, when it comes to a different mode of thinking, we have to educate our brain and our imagination to think of him in accordance with his own standards. The game would be very artificial if I would pass a judgment on him by my own standards. I'm not telling this, I'm not telling you that. But basically, when you come to think of that, these guys have managed to have a real revolution in 50 years. Just, you know, actually how things will look like actually that 50 years ago. I think that it's just a kind of a gradual thing. Even if Saudi Arabia is going to do normalization with Israel, it would be sort of a Saudi step, you know, which means actually 2 forward, 1 back, 2 back, 1 forward. You won't have kind of a swift with which actually 100% full normalization. We know that.
Of course, it's different. Let me open Pandora's box here. Do you think that democracy is working really, really well now in the West? You see what's going on in many countries. You see how the debt is growing. The government, you know,
I think that
governments,
once,
one after another, just pushing the debt.
well, let me tell you that I agree with you, but listen, when we are using the term democracy as kind of a thing by which to measure things in the Middle East, we are doing a grave mistake. Why? Democracy is something that has been developed in Europe for hundreds of years. You know that even a year after the French Revolution, they didn't have a democracy. Yeah, yeah. So I think that democracy is kind of a huge process, and you have to bring in people to understand what is that, to internalize it, to fight for that. All these things haven't happened in the Middle East. So the game is different. Now, you can't stick to democracy is the best thing, and I don't, you know, I'm not willing to hear any other thing. But if you are a researcher of states like Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Iran, what have you, Egypt, you have to take into account the, you know, the hollow sound of history, of culture, of language, of flavors. Without that, you know, we can come up with some models, and this would be just mere political science with no kind of a strength of penetrating the reality. This is what I think.
Yeah, the sound like of it when you the sound of it when you talk about they are not democracy. Yeah, I agree halfway, right? The whole power and so on. They are monarchies, right? So they have this, let's say, framework that they can claim that the successor need to stay and so on. Democracy doesn't apply to multi-ethnic societies like in the way it is right now. In Saudi Arabia has its own problems.
You should ask yourself, why do democracy, sorry,
Scare them?
no, why do monarchies have weathered the crisis? And my answer is very, very simple. The more pretentious you are, the more chances you are going to collapse. Nasser, Republic, Boumediene, others, they were very great, but they were actually chasing the wind. They actually were coming up with a dream with which actually to bypass all these problems. When you have this monarchy, they are dealing bits and pieces with the stuff people are familiar with. They are not coming up with all these slogans. In my opinion, the simple fact that monarchies are much, much more resilient in the Middle East than those revolutionary regimes is first and foremost what I just said now.
Last thing.
We have to give other people chance.
Just last thing.
Okay.
One sentence. Don't you think that these monarchies are the best interlocutor to Israel right now? Because if you had democracies in those countries, the next government would just roll back what the Abraham Accords will okay.
Yes, I think so. Yes,
I'm
they
gonna,
are.
I'm gonna take the prerogative to make 2 statements before Daya comes in. and then you'll be after. So I was also in, as you know, in the UAE several times. And just as a food for thought, my parents, who are Canadian, spend half the year in Florida, like many snowbirds. And they don't go to synagogue anymore. Because in Florida, in their synagogue, they have armed guards at the synagogue because of the attacks that have been going on in the United States against the Jewish community. So they're afraid to go to a synagogue.
Thank you.
I was in the UAE. I went to Rabbi Abadia's home, and I was late. It was Shabbat. I was late for Shabbat, so I arrived at the gate of the synagogue of his home. I knocked on the. I can't ring the bell because it's Shabbat, so I knocked on the gate. There was no answer. So after a few minutes, I opened the gate and went into the courtyard, and then I went to the front of the house, which is also the synagogue. I was knocking on the door for a while. There was no answer, so I worked up the courage to enter into the house, and the Friday Shabbat prayers were going on. So here's a synagogue in the UAE. Nothing is locked. There's no security. Everything is open. And in the United States of America, people are fearful to go to synagogue. That's one thing. The other thing I want to mention, I'll be very brief, is also I was invited. I was invited to Saudi Arabia twice in the last 6 months, and the people who invited me know that I'm Israeli. And I went to meet some people connected to the government. It was very interesting conversations. And then they arranged a tour for me and 2 other Jewish people to Medina. So Medina was closed to Jewish people for centuries. And we were given a tour of Medina. We planted trees in a grove that was owned by Jewish people 1,200 years ago. We may have been the first people to plant. I think we were the first. We planted date trees. Jewish people planting date trees in the orchards that were Jewish. The first time in probably 1,000 years. And we were given a tour of Jewish Medina by people from the government, which was amazing.
Yeah.
So there is a rapprochement. Something is definitely happening. It was an amazing experience.
And when you look at the curricula, even in Egypt, for the first time, you have in the textbooks chapters which deal with the Camp David Accord, legitimize the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. So I'm not saying that it comes bottom up. No, it's top down. But you know what? In the end of the day, it has kind of an impact because people are running their life under different notions. And basically, we do see that in the UAE, this is, I think that everybody would agree, this is the safest state in the world. That everybody would agree, because you shouldn't actually do something that, basically harass people or say something against the notions or the regulations. But, it's pros and cons. I can't give you kind of a bottom line. But, I came to admire those guys because I thought that to take your tribalism from the deep desert and to bring it into kind of a very, very modern state, and all the time to do this adjustments without actually losing your ability to read your past and to be very, very loyal to your basic narrative. In my opinion, this is kind of a great strength. And I would just... Yeah.
So I just want to first thank you because a couple years ago when I heard you here, you really opened my eyes to this idea of taking off the American lens when we look at the Middle East. It's very important, and it really shaped the way that I teach part of the history of the Middle East. But my question to you is, would you agree that basically the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the collapse, and the birth of these nation states that were divvied up by Europeans is contributing to the crisis that we see? They're not ready to be nation states. Yes.
History tells you. The Ottomans were here. They were genius.
Right.
If you come to understand actually the way Ottomans calibrated reality, their political mechanisms, that's unbelievable. You know, even in Israel nowadays, we are using some canons from the Ottoman judicial law. We are having many things that are that get back to Ottoman history. But here's the thing: the Ottomans didn't harass people with the notion of, I want you to be more and more similar to me. First of all, they were Muslims, so they didn't have to do that. But they understood that once you have a bunch of people who adhere to a specific sect, minority, you should provide them with sort of an autonomy. And it was a gigantic Ottoman Empire. In Europe, of course, in East Europe, in the Middle East, and just try to think of Istanbul running the whole network in kind of a way that was very fascinating, because the closer you are to Istanbul, you see actually the organs of the central government there. When you go to Morocco, when you go to Algeria, when you go to some other parts, you wouldn't see kind of a presence of the Ottomans, but they would actually authorize somebody from the place to do kind of a give and take. This is, by the way, not to deal with the soul or not to harm people while trying to deal with their basic cultural spots and history. You have to just respect their otherness. What the West has done here is a grave mistake, one by one. And you know, if you come to think of Afghanistan, Alexander Macdon was in Afghanistan. And he didn't succeed actually there when he was there. Russia, Soviets, British, Americans. So look at that. This is pathetic. Pathetic. These guys actually were trying actually to change something without having got a clue about what the thing is. So this is the problem that you see. There are many people who have solutions. When you delve into that, you realize that they don't know what the problems are. Solutions they have. What the problems are, more often than time they haven't got a clue about that.
Inbo.
Professor Rabi, thank you very much about the important insight. What is the current chance for Israeli normalization with the Saudi Arabia? And do you think all relevant players on our side were properly looked at?
Well, I think in Bar that it has to do with the Americans. If the Americans are going to deliver and provide the Saudis with this backup, so to speak, and military technology, so to speak, and green light for this nuclear capacity for civilian purposes, this would make the Saudis much more, I would say, appeased and much more, let's say, satisfied. If they are not going to give them that, you're going to see the Saudis everywhere, flirting with China, flirting here, flirting there, in order to make the Americans be back and provide something. Now, I think that Israel should think of kind of a situation where the Americans are coming up with a deal. The Saudis would like actually Israelis to come up with something, because something with a Palestinian coin, because Saudi Arabia is the guardian of the holy sites in Mecca. This is a very important Arab state. The Saudis are not going to do what Anwar Sadat had done in 1979. They're not going to say, well, give me what I want, and I do not care about such other things. They don't care about the Palestinians too much. But their visibility actually forces them, to make sure that in that kind of a deal, they're going to get something from Israel, which would make a sense also for the Saudis and the Americans, or Democrat Americans. I think that if, I'm just giving you an example, the Saudis would really, really be thrilled to hear Israelis say, you know what, we are going to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli thing from now on in kind of a wide forum where we're going to have representatives of Arab states dealing in front of us together with the Palestinians about a possible solution. It's not two-state solution, it's not those slogans, but this is kind of a thing by which to make sure that you break the ice, that you are coming up with something which would be very, very different than what had been done till now. You see, but what counts for the Saudis, once again, is the Saudis. Are we going to have a military backup? Are we going not to be lagged behind if Iran goes nuclear and we have the approval? And are we well equipped with what we need in case of crisis? And this is kind of an American music. For that, they should talk to the Americans, because this is exactly what they did from the 30s, last century, 100 years ago, when Saudi Arabia was established. So we are there. And in my opinion, once again, you would like to talk to me about, what we are trying to do, and you know that because we are coming from the same place, of course. What we are trying to equip our students with is multifocal lens. Don't use the same lens when you talk about Saudi Arabia and Iran and Egypt and Jordan. Each one of them is a different case study. If you are not familiar, well familiar with the language, with the history, with the way people do memorize themselves, this is so important. You're going to talk or pass a judgment on them while using your own standards. But this is actually, that's something which is very artificial. So this is why actually we do think that way we can move together. Yep.
So the last question, then we'll break.
Yeah, Professor, thank you for your presentation. My question is dealing with internal dynamics in the country and the conflicts within, right?
Internal dynamics where?
In terms of the
In Israel?
economic, well, just in the United States. I think my focus question is, how are the internal dynamics of political, social polarity and conflict influencing United States foreign policy? Particularly when you think about the word democracy, right? Malcolm X said, democracy is nothing more than disguised hypocrisy, because many of the African Americans and others that live in the States, we just recently, 7 years, could go to a poll, right? My grandparents couldn't vote.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the turmoil that you see in the United States, particularly the whole Trumpism, right? Trump, to me, honestly, is a white supremacist. I mean, his father went to a KKK meeting. So, all these internal dynamics to me are influencing how the Democrats or Biden, move with their foreign policy. So, do you think those internal conflicts are creating?
Always, Kissinger said once that Israel hasn't got a foreign policy. What counts for Israel is what happened in Israel inside, and from that you can glean actually the stuff that Israel is coming up with when it comes to foreign policy. And I think that it is applicable to every case study you can think of. I definitely agree with you. But with regard to Israel, we are in a deep, real problem. You see that Israel is becoming kind of, there was an article actually in one of the main Sharq al-Awsat, which is a Saudi-based paper, and the notion was هل ستستشرق إسرائيل. What is that? Israel is becoming more Easternized in the sense of Middle East. So Israel is showing some, modes of behavior which would make somebody say, hey, Israel behaves like a Middle Eastern state. Many Israelis would say that, no, we are basically, cooperating with the West. We are a Western country. We are a democracy. I can't tell you that, but I know one thing, and this is history tells us. And in Israel, everybody has its own opinion. This is the only state you could find 10 million prime ministers. Everybody knows better than anybody else what to do. I can tell you that. History tells us that when you have that kind of a fierce rivalry between two camps, each one of them is totally different in terms of what Israel is and in terms of the narrative it adheres to. But if you're going to have kind of a winner, an ultimate winner in that kind of a conflict, this is the beginning of the end of the state and the society. This is what our history tells us. So the only thing you can get out of it is to find out kind of a middle course. The question is whether you have a leadership which is able to strive a middle course or to strike a middle course. The last thing I would tell you is what when you are in a mid of a crisis, you're going to go to the British Prime Minister in the Second World War, Winston Churchill. Once actually when he was taking a train to Westminster, some school pupils actually were asking him while in train, Sir Winston, can you tell us something optimistic these days? And this was before the Blitz on London, after the Blitz on Coventry, before the Blitz. And he said, never let a good crisis go waste. That's the most important thing also for Israel these days. You are having so deep a crisis that it would be a real waste if you are not going to make something of it. And, we'll have to wait and see how things are going to be played out. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you together.
So, Uzi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So,